And
I'm excited.
We are live.
Right on, man.
How you doing, Jay? John.
I'm good.
Johnny?
I'm real good.
Johnny. It says Jay on the screen and it threw me.
No, I apologize. How's everything going?
Good. We had a pretty eventful Mother's Day. We kept ourselves pretty busy, which is good. This Mother's Day was actually a little bit rough for me. Not every Mother's Day is as rough as this one was. Like, just kind of constant reminders.
Yeah.
And because of that, like, I put out a little video yesterday just kind of saying hey to just reaching out to a mom that can't hear me, but it felt good for me.
Well, and that's why I was asking, to be fair.
Yeah.
That's how you were doing. Because I saw that and I was like, I feel you, right? I feel you on that one. You know, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have my mother, but at the same time, my grandmother's on the way out, and I feel it. And it's one of those things where we're not happy about it. But it, obviously, especially because the way she's going, my grandmother's currently in the latter stages of dementia / Alzheimer's.
That's rough.
So she's, yeah, and it's I had my first experience with that. 'Cause my mother insisted I call her, so I called her and. It took her a good 2 minutes before she finally was like, Johnny? And I was like, yes. And that helped. That I seemed to give her something to latch on to, but it was like, man, it was like, God bless. Anyways, I'm not comparing. But
you were in the weeds there for a minute.
I told my mother, I said, don't make me call her again like that. I just, being there is one thing, but man.
No, I understand. I've had to talk to a couple people in my life that were, just not altogether, in this realm of reality anymore. It's a certain point where you realize that it's a little bit selfish on your point to try to get them to latch something onto, because, they're swimming in their own thing, and, they may get a little frustrated with themselves, but, we want that familiarity. We want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we went to my in-laws, which they're an actual delight. I love them to death. And we made a really, it's like one of the best damn chicken casseroles I think I've ever made in my life.
That's awesome.
We bought some gluten-free desserts that were good for Marley. Brought some non-gluten-free for her father, because for him, he can just taste the difference. And we're like, all right, fair enough. It's all right. We'll get you some gluten.
Welcome to It's Your Loss podcast, where raw stories of resilience and healing are told, all while uncovering and destigmatizing the diverse symptoms of loss.
Welcome back to the podcast. And if you missed last month's episode, it's your loss. I am host Michael LeBlanc, and I have a very special guest with me today. They're all going to be very special guests if I have anything to say about it. We have Johnny Johnson. Hello. How are you?
I'm good.
You
real good.
Are a self-professed know-it-all.
I am totally.
You are a nerd. You are you're married. But let's just get all of it out there. Your social security number is like 614.
For real. I have a dog. I have a dog and cat.
Nice. A pet dad.
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. I'm also a real dad. My daughter's she's 19 and she's on her way to college. She's doing college-y stuff right now. So,
yeah. What's she going to college for?
She's actually switched majors. She wanted to be a radiology person, and then she said she came to us one day in tears, and she's like, "I just wanted to do that for the money, but I really want to be a teacher." And we're like, "Then be a teacher,
Be a
kid.
teacher.
Whatever, if that's in your heart, you love." And we know she loves kids. She does Vacation Bible School at church, and she teaches swim to kids for a place called British Swim School.
Oh, that's cool.
And so she's loves doing that stuff. We're like, we kind of knew you needed to do something with kids, but if do it. Like, do it. If you want to be a teacher, do it.
But was there ever a point, like, in closed doors, you're just looking at your wife and going, radiology? Like, really?
We all the time. Because here's the thing. She's terrible at math. But she, again, it's more, I think it was always about her heart for people, and then eventually became her heart for kids. Because even then she wanted to be like a pediatrician or something. And we were like, well, then why don't you just, I mean, I get it, but like, you want to deal with kids, just be a teacher or something,
I think when I was young, I wanted to do a medical thing because of the fact that I do have compassion for people. I want to see people do better and maybe help them get better. Yeah. But then, like, everything leading up to it and the darker, grittier side of healthcare, the politics of it, the older that I got, the more that I just realized I was like, maybe I'll become an architect. That didn't work either.
No, I love it. He's like, I don't know if I want to do this. I'll do something else. Right on, man.
Well, Johnny, I don't know how much you know about the show. Maybe you've caught an episode or two just to kind of get familiarized. But
I have.
This is a show about loss and grief and, you know, the way that people deal with it. And the one thing that I've always wanted to do when I started this show was to talk to people who not only lost people, because that's going to happen. Even if it's people that you don't talk to anymore, maybe you're a loner, people that have been in your life, they're going to go away, or you might go away first. Who knows? But loss will happen. And I was like, but there's so much other kinds of loss. There's material loss. There's station of life. I want to talk to somebody who's lost a limb. I haven't had a chance to find somebody to do that yet, but I know that's got to do, some backflips through the 5 stages. And here you
I can imagine, especially because you have ghost limbs and stuff. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
You suddenly got me massively like, wow.
Yeah.
I can only imagine, like, because you're right. They have to deal with the actual physical loss, but at the same time, there's that whole idea of phantom limb where you're like, you feel still technically a connection to that thing that's not there anymore. It's like, I can't imagine.
Like, does that put you through like a little mini spiral of the 5 stages when you feel it again? I'm so interested. And one day my missing limb will come and I will be able to do my interview then. But you come along and, I asked you if you want to do it. You said yes. And we've come across the station or the identity, the station of life, a part of your personality that gets lost. And I don't want to bury the lead too much.
No, sure.
So it says right there on all of your socials that you are a recovering narcissist.
Yes.
And I didn't know where a show would come out of that until we sat down for our 5 and 10 minute, little technical thing. And I started to see it. And to be honest with you, I think there's going to be a lot of similarities between other conversations I've had with how it happened when it first came to you, how you dealt with it, and where you are now. I
told my wife about our short little discussion because she was also like, hey, how'd it go? And I said, I'm excited for this now because especially as I was mentioning things and you were pointing out, oh, that's like this. And I really had to think, wow, yeah, he's right. And it's funny. I had to deal with so many other issues at the time that I don't know that I ever processed that's kind of similar to that pattern or template of the 5 stages and things.
Part of the reason I did this show is because I was starting to see little flashes of the 5 stages and a lot of things that I've lost. And I'm a Buddhist. I'm not a great Buddhist, but I am a Buddhist. And one of the things that I struggle with is not becoming too attached to physical things. Before I really dove into it and started to think about what Buddhism meant to me, what material things meant to me, I was getting I was getting like really upset whenever I lost like anything. I was cherishing all my possessions, and I would get to the point where like I would recognize bargaining as in, well, yeah, I lost this, but I could just buy it again. And I was like,
I'll just get it one more time.
Yeah, it's okay. I could just get it. And then they say I can't buy it again. Oh, I'm in depression now. Again, so many things that we lose. It sparks that journey. Let's get into it. Let's start with the first stage.
Sure.
And to do this properly, I want you to tell me that story you were telling me before. None of these people have heard it on when it was kind of just thrown in your face that you were a narcissist. Go for it.
So I got married at a really young age, way younger than most people. I was like 19, and it was stupid. It was done in the heat of emotions, as kids are. And we were married for all of about 2 years, and then she cheated on me and got pregnant by another guy. And I was trying my best to sort of figure, but there had been like all kinds of sneaking behind. And it's funny because that's not actually the stuff that matters. And by that I mean, when we talked, I was because she got pregnant. And I was like, hey man, it's okay.
Not with you, but who she was.
No, it's right. And I was like, hey, I was like, look, I want to work on this. I want to whatever. I really felt like I had grown up in that kind of a family where you're supposed to work out problems and this and that and whatnot. And I was like, let's figure this out. And she was very much like, it's somebody else's baby and the whole thing. And then finally, I was trying so bad to use all of my manipulation tactics to try to keep the situation because she validated things in me. And that's part of being a narcissist, is finding people that validate those elements. And all of a sudden that wasn't happening. And by the very nature of cheating on me, that was somehow insulting to my sensibility as a narcissist. Like, how could that have happened? But rather than being angry about it, I saw my grip on something that defined me slipping. And so I was trying my best to do all the things, and it started to frustrate her. And she just suddenly was like, you understand? And she just ripped into me. And I'm standing, and we're in my garage, and I'm just and as she's talking, I stopped talking, and I listened, and I remember sitting there just kind of stunned, and I was looking through her, but I remember hearing everything. And when it was all said and done, I remember I was kind of shell shocked. I was like, okay. I vaguely remember her saying, "I'm sorry," as she left, and I stood there, and it was actually my mom who came out and said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't think so," and I said, "Can you give me a little bit? Can you just give me some space?" And so she went back inside. The issue for me wasn't that wasn't that my ex-wife had offended me or upset me. It was that everything she said rang true. I did not know how to process that because I didn't have a name for any of it. And so I was very angry. I became very angry at women for a good year and a half. And finally, I wasn't happy being angry anymore. So a friend of mine suggested, why don't you go see a therapist? There was this, they call them faith-based therapists, but it's not a faith-based therapist. Like, that person's not a Christian. They're someone who knows how to deal with Christian people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And in fact, she was a very honest therapist who was like, just so we're all in the clear, I respect faith. I have a faith. I am not a person of faith. I just know how to come at you that way. And I remember I sat down and I said, well, look, first thing out the gate, I just need you to know, I think I'm smarter than you. And I want to be open, and I want you to know that, so that I can't try to manipulate. I want to I don't want to manipulate my way through this, because one thing about me, as I'm very intelligent, I had to say, if I want to actually get anything out of this, I have to be real and raw, whatever that meant. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And so these were one-on-one sessions we did once a week, and it was about 4 or 5 weeks in. And I was having just a particularly emotional episode during the therapy session, and I forget what exactly we were talking about, but I was frustrated, and I was like, well, why does this happen, blah, blah, blah. And she just kind of sat there for a second, and she had been writing some notes. She put it down, and she said, Johnny, you're a narcissist. I felt like she'd slapped me. It was right at the end of our session, so it's even worse. And she's like, and we'll talk about it next week. So I had to sit on that for a week. And
same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And so it was rough. It was just coming to that conclusion. Eventually, I came back, and I was like, well, let's say you're right. So what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean? And then again, I'm intelligent. I did look things up, but the internet wasn't as much as it is today. Back then it was, I'm going to download my Dragon Ball desktop. I'm going to leave for an hour while it's doing that. You know what I mean?
And it might be done by the time you get back.
No, for real. And so I was able to look some things up, and obviously I had the library, and I looked at some different things and whatnot. So I understood the concept. And I even told her up front, I said, I'm having difficulty with this. And mainly because I thought I'm generous, I'm open, let me tell you all the good things about me. You know what I mean? And not to mention, I had grown up in a house as a person of faith. And I'm like, how can I be, as a Christian, how can I be a narcissist? It doesn't make sense. I'm like, come on, really?
Well, that right there, I mean, that's got to be textbook denial. Like, you're trying to validate your existence by holding it against everything else that you know that's around you. Like, how could I be this? I'm this. There's something to be said for at least taking the time to, research, was she right when she told you that? Which, by the way, I want to touch on, faith-based therapy. It turns out that the person who I went to therapy with for the first time that I went to therapy, they were also in that part of faith-based. And yeah, it wasn't that they brought their faith into it. She was like, how do you reconcile being the person that you are, and, having these things and having these people and living the life that you are in the middle of America, practice Buddhism. And I'm like, practice is a strong word there. But I appreciated her bringing that up, because she didn't bring it up in every session. She just, if she thought it was pertinent.
Sure. Right.
So if anybody, ever stumbles across faith-based therapy, don't shy from it.
No, my therapist was good at that. I remember I was very hard on myself in the early stages of all this, and when I was on the one-on-ones, because eventually she switched me over to her. She had a group therapy for addicts, and her thought process was we should approach it that way, mainly because of how I was just certain behavior patterns I was showing in this whole thing. She was like, why don't we approach it that way? Because she actually used the phrase, do you want to recover from this? And I remember thinking to myself, what does that mean, recover from it? And it was, and so she optioned for that. But there was a couple of times when during our one-on-ones when she would say, well, you're being really harsh. Doesn't the word say to forgive? Why is it okay? Why should we forgive others out there, but not, why aren't you doing any of the forgiving inside inwardly? And I remember so I would be like, shut up. You don't know nothing. You know what I mean? You just don't want to hear that stuff. You're like, look, I want to be mad. I want to justify my being angry at all this.
I mean, that pretty much touches, the denial right there. So you go into the group therapy, right? How long did you do that?
So it was all in about 4 years, which sounds crazy, but I was getting so much in terms of learning about myself. And it's so funny because, I had given her permission to call me out on things if she saw it, because you kind of have to go backward a little bit to how I got there. When I was a kid growing up, I was always the fat kid. I hit 6 feet tall at 5th grade. My class picture is me standing next to the teacher, and people think in the picture that I was the assistant teacher or something.
Hey, look, it's the TA.
Yeah, for real. And I was huge. And when you're that 5th grade, you're that size, and everyone else is significantly smaller, it immediately puts a light that this is in high school. And when you're at that age, it's awkward. It's weird. And people treat it that way. And so I'm being bullied by kids. And so I had to start liking myself a lot. And I had to really embrace that. And I studied books on psychology. I studied because I wanted to make people like me. And part of those things, you have to understand what you're trying to sell, so to speak. And that was actually a lot of how the approach happened. And so little by little, I began drinking my own Kool-Aid, if you will, in terms of, look how great I am. Yeah. I'm worth being a friend with. And I jokingly used to say I was the guy who was the friend of the girl. And when she broke up with the guy, or she would come cry on my shoulder, and then ultimately we'd have a relationship. And so little by little, life became a manipulation. And then you start seeing, oh, well, look, see, I am valid. These people do like me. Yeah. And then it became, I'm smarter than everyone. It doesn't help, and I hate this part because this part always comes across conceited. I have an IQ of about 180, but it's not what you think. By that I mean everyone equates that to, oh, well, why aren't you Einstein or whatever? It's not that kind of intelligence. It's I process information fast.
Right.
Yeah. So if I'm exposed to information, I can.
It's not that you know everything. Which everybody tends to think that it's like you were pre-programmed with knowledge. That's not how a fucking IQ works.
No, I just process information really quickly. So getting people to like me suddenly became, be better off doing something this way, but I don't know how to tell you that. So I'm just gonna help you in that direction. And you start manipulating people. And that manipulation suddenly becomes, I am better than, I'm smarter than, and then looking down at people, and their ideas are suddenly not the greatest ideas. And you start having this negative outlook toward everybody, but everybody should look at me as being great. And it didn't help that because of my IQ, I was able to learn. I learned skills fast. I used to sit in the mirror as a kid, and I know everything my face is doing all the time.
Okay.
I know what the expressions are. I know what it feels like. I understand how it looks, and I know what my best side is, if you will. So now fast forward to therapy. So I'm in this group of, as far as I'm concerned, a whole lot of less thans. And I'm like, I know that I have an issue, but I'm constantly in this, and I don't have that issue. And I don't have that issue. And these are, by the way, this is a mix of people with Narcotics Anonymous people, Alcohol Anonymous people who have varying addictions. It wasn't just, almost nobody was like me. Everybody had a form of addiction. This was an addictions group. Wow. Because there was
seems like a psychological experiment that you were brought into. It's wild.
No, it was, and her mentality, she wrote a book about it later, not about me, but in general about how the idea is the commonalities of addict mentality. Yeah. And actually, she didn't mention me by name because I asked her not to. But she does mention that narcissism is potentially an addictive behavior because of what it does and gives you, and the endorphin rush. There are a lot of similar things that happen in the brain for narcissists that happen with people who use drugs or alcohol.
Do you happen to know the name of the book?
Oh my gosh, I used to.
Straight out your mind, just like that.
No, it was like, I think it was like Out of the Darkness or something.
Okay.
It was I'll look it up.
If you find it, we'll put it right here because I think that would be wild for other people to to read that.
Yeah, she was really, I liked, man, she was great. And I think she still like practices like loose. I don't think she does it officially. She used to be like much more involved with it and whatnot, but now she's kind of retired. But so in that group setting, I would look and see everybody with their various things, and there would be moments in it where I would start trying to get people to talk and open up, and I would be trying to manipulate people, and she would call me out. She would be like, first, stop doing that. Second, this is my group, and you need to understand that you. And I would be like, you're right. And everybody started to understand what my deal was, and that's really why I was there so long, is because I had to really get out of my.
So I imagine, with a group setting, you see that thing, everybody sees it in shows and movies. It's like, hi, my name is, and I am. So did you do that as well? Like,
yeah.
And just let everybody know why you were, wow.
Yeah. And everyone, and it's so funny because I felt stupid because what you do, it is exactly how it looks. You say, hey, my name is Johnny. I am a narcissist. And I would have said just like that. And she said, don't minimize. And I was like, fine, I'm a narcissist.
There you go.
Because I was like,
Own it, right.
Right. And it's so funny because everyone then in concert, hi, John. And I was like, I remember thinking to myself,
the stories are true.
Yeah. I was thinking to myself, this is so stupid. But
so, I mean,
that's forward.
That's gotta bring you like moments of frustration, especially, during those times when you were first brought into it, and, she's calling you out on your shit and everything. How much anger were you holding on or letting go of during that time?
There were a couple of she had to ask me to step out a couple times.
Really?
Yeah, it was mainly because one of the tactics I would use to manipulate people was ingenuine relatability. So let's say you're telling me something about what you're going through. I would either make up a scenario that was really close to what you're dealing with to empathize, or I would actually find something that maybe wasn't exactly and try to give it a weird tangential connection. And she would call me out and be like, so if you want to empathize, then just plain empathize. Just be able to say, look, I'm sorry, I can't imagine what you're going through, but it sounds like it sucks. And that was so weird to me because nobody liked me for my thoughts and opinions when I was younger. Why would they care now? I have to be this person that people think I am. I can't just be whoever, because I didn't know who me was. It was odd. And so little by little, I started feeling who I was slipping away. And that became really scary. I remember there were times I would be like, I have to walk. And then she would correct me and I'd go out there and she would come out and she was like, I'm sorry, did I do something? And I was like, no, you don't understand. And she was the one who had to tell me he was slipping. Whoever he was, the other me was going away. And I was like, where is he going? I'm not safe without that. And that was it was, I haven't thought about that in a while. I haven't touched that in a minute.
Hey, I can relate in the way of letting go of the person who I was in my first relationship, my first marriage, and learning how to be a genuine person, because I'm not going to lie, like looking back at younger me, I was pulling kind of the same moves you were, because I wanted to always be on the top of like an argument. I felt that my opinions were going to be more helpful. And then looking back on the way that we were living life, I'll be honest with you, I had no room to talk. We were only basically just floating along. And then the moment that I wanted to like do something different, she was like, this isn't the person that I want to be with. And she went her own way. Our relationship broke horribly at that point, and I've talked about this before back in season 1 where I was talking about there was a lot of bargaining in my part of the relationship, and I was like, oh, we could definitely make this work. I mean, it sounds like you did the same thing. Yeah,
we could definitely make this work.
It's fine. We can make this work. We want to be poly? Well, whatever. Let's do that. But after I got into the relationship that I am now, and I realized what it's like to be with somebody who pushes back equally, if not more than I do, with how she sees things, but not because she wants to be right, but because she wants the friction. That did so much for me to kind of scrub away that kind of person that I thought relationships needed. And dude, I went through an emotional wildfire. There was sadness, anger. Right. I think I probably went through this list at least like 6 or 7 times while I was trying to figure myself out. I can't imagine doing that in a room while everybody's trying to construct and deconstruct themselves. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That is wild.
Well, and once I got kind of past that rough early stage, I would say about the midway through year 2, I began to really use the group for what it's meant to be used for, which is getting that point of real relatability, where I would see somebody, they'd be talking about a substance, but they would describe what it felt like for them. Oh, that felt really great, and it's this huge high and endorphins. And I remember thinking to myself, when I would manipulate people and they would go the way I wanted it to go, it was amazing. I was just like, yeah, see, aren't you happier now? Because you listened, of course. And by that point, my therapist had to actually pull things out of me because she realized I had kind of turned a corner. And at that point, I was trying to just absorb stuff. But she would see in my face that she would say, John, it looks like something hit you just then. And I'd be like, well, yeah. And everybody, it's funny, they started then being like, no, it's okay. You're not being that way. Because I started being real timid. Like, am I being that way? Am I being real right now? And then, and about year 3, I discovered
I'm existing.
Yeah. Am I, it's like, so, you like my insights because they're just okay, whatever. But I remember about year 3, I had a different turn, and it was, I realized I got a lot more by giving other people value. And I stopped trying to convince people who I was and of my value, and started kind of just saying, hey, you know what? You're awesome. Like, you're great. So what? You don't do anything that I do. Who cares? I don't do anything you do. Let's get into what you're about. You know what I mean? How do you approach stuff? And why do you do the things you do? And how are you put together? And that suddenly became a whole different world. And people started to show me they appreciated me for me and me for who I was. And that was yes. But then it was such a weird, like, imposter syndrome set in hard. And it's just like, because I was always feeling like, I don't know if I'm deserved, I don't know if I deserve all that. Like, but all right. And I stopped, like, we almost had to go the opposite direction, where she had to say, no, it's okay for you to be loved, be appreciated, have people treat you, positively. And this is the good side of how things used to be, and if people wait till people ask you for your advice, and don't you give it to them genuinely. I remember for the longest time, I would self-regulate. Because when you're a narcissist, lying is very second nature. Like, and I would literally start for the early days. And once in a while, I'll still do it. I'll say something, and just first thing out of my mouth, I'll blurt it and go, I'm sorry, I just lied to you. That's not true. What I just said is not true. And now it comes off to people now like, oh, you just you forgot it or misthought. But the truth is, in my head, that was an old behavior. I spit something out of my mouth just because of years of my childhood, like, structure that's in there. And once it slips out. And I'd be like, oh yeah, totally. Like, I have this and this. And I'd be like, no, that's not at all the truth. I don't know why I said that.
Kind of like that thing what we do where we try to fit in with our friend groups, especially if we're new in the friend groups. And they say something along the lines is like, you've seen such and such show, or, oh my God, I love this band. And you're like, fuck yeah, I love that band too. You're spending the next 2 days going, what songs do they sing? Just
Who
to try
is this group? Yeah, exactly. Why do I know them? But
oh man, I messed up the biggest chance to really kind of just have like a little fling relationship while I was in I was 12th grade, getting ready for the Navy. I was probably in the best like shape of my life at that point, as far as like muscle mass and slimness. And so I struck up this conversation with this really cool chick, and she was like, hey, do you know Drops of Jupiter, which is a song by Train? And I went, yeah, man, I love all their songs.
Lord.
And she was like,
because you thought that was the name of the band.
Yep. And I was like, oh man, anything to get this chick to go like have a Wetzel's pretzel with me at the mall, And I was like, I was ready to say yes to anything. Awesome. The conversation flatlined after that. Yeah, that was risk taken, and I did not calculate that well. So awesome. Let me talk or ask about the Johnny that wasn't in the group at that point, because when you're in therapy, it's really easy to focus on the things that you should do because you have people there guiding you. You're surrounded by, especially if you're doing group, you're surrounded by people who are supposed to be putting in the work as well. What about the Johnny who wasn't in therapy, how was he dealing with life?
So I immediately threw myself back more into my faith. I was going to church with my parents, and I had gotten really involved in my job, and I was really kind of, not that I wasn't involved in my job, but I mean, like, I'd really, like, I was working late because it was just me at that point. I was not in a relationship of any kind.
Which is probably a good thing at that point for the deconstruction, reconstruction phase that you were in.
Yes, no, for sure. And I actually, it's so funny that you mentioned, because again, my whole life, it's a spiral, man. I don't know how far you want to go down this rabbit hole. It's a spiral, brother. I met a girl through a friend. I had some friends I'd known back in the day who suddenly crossed my paths again. And they used to tell me, they're like, oh yeah, we thought you were full of crap back in the day, whatever else. And I was like, oh, it's fine. And so I started hanging out with them. And so I met this girl through them. Her name was Erica. And so she ended up being my second wife. And we had started talking, and I remember being very upfront with her about who I was. It was like, look, I don't even know. She was going to college. I said, I don't even know if I'm supposed to, because if I'm handling this like an addict, I'm not supposed to be getting in relationships and stuff yet. But I was very upfront because I wanted her to know.
Real. Yeah.
I was trying, because that was like a huge thing at the time, was like honesty and all this. And so she was like, all right, well, I go back to school, and, you know, just whatever. When I come home, I'll touch base with you, see how you're doing. I was like, all right, cool. And so we did. So about a year,
nice,
2 years or so. It wasn't until after I got out of therapy. I was doing 1 or 2 follow-up one-on-ones by myself, just because, to kind of make sure everything was okay. My training wheels were off completely, and I was good, more or less. And I was always welcome back. And a couple of times I took her up on it, and I would come back to do one-on-ones just to kind of double check and stuff. And she said, you know, if you feel like you're good to be in a relationship, that's entirely up to you. This is new territory. The reason I had you in that group was because there are many of the same behaviors, but you don't necessarily have all those same kind of trigger points. It's just a matter of being open and honest. And so I was like, all right. I almost went the opposite direction, in that I really was trying to be very, like, I was like, where do you want to go eat? You want to go eat somewhere? Wherever you want to go eat, we can go eat. Like, I had no more opinions. My opinions were gone. So that's how I began. I overcompensated for how I used to be. And I still had to kind of learn. I still didn't know who I was, really. I really didn't. I was trying to learn who I was. And probably being in a relationship wasn't the best thing, because I got the level of NRE at that stage was so high, in terms of just that new relationship energy. I was learning. It's just boom, and it would just blow up. So a friend of mine invited me to his wedding. He was getting married, and he was having a BDSM wedding. And by that I just mean it was at a club. He was a sir, and he was marrying his bottom. They were doing a promise. They were doing a promise thing first, which was the collaring, and then a year from then they would get married. So it was essentially a glorified engagement.
That's such a cool scene. I've had a couple. I've got a couple of friends that were in that for like 15, 20 years, and they were like, you know, we're gonna go settle down on a double wide. While they were there, the stories, the outfits, the parties.
Oh, yeah, no, so much. So in an effort to be sort of whoever I was, I threw because you got to remember, in all that time that I was being not me, I was manipulating people and I was always chameleoning and being who someone else thought I should, who I wanted to I thought that person thought I would be. So this was very much an exploratory time for me, in terms of trying to figure out what my likes, dislikes, and all that nonsense was. We were married for all of 2 years. We went to this thing, and our world exploded. We began throwing parties at our house and the whole 9 yards, and it was just learning. And there was this like overabundance of honesty that was both appreciated, and later on it was like, was it the right? I was learning who I was in a crazy, insane way. And then eventually we drifted apart. And one day we were sitting there, and she says, we've kind of just become roommates. And I said, yeah, we kind of have. And she was like, well, then I'm just going to move out. And I was like, okay. And she did. And it was over. And it was, super crazy. Then that's when the unthinkable happened. And somebody who had been attracted to that particular fire version of me came in my life and stayed. So I had 3 partners at the time, and 2 of them left and 1 of them stayed. And the one who stayed became my third wife.
Which, if I'm doing the abacus right now, that's your current wife.
No.
Okay. All right. I got
no. My current wife
wrong.
is the.
We're gonna put
my
this
current
over
wife
here.
is the 4th wife. My current wife is the 4th wife, and she's my final done. This is my forever wife.
My bad for jumping ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. But this is the one that I briefly touched on last week, or when we talked briefly in the fight.
Yeah.
She was a narcissist of a different kind than I had.
Hey.
Yeah, and she had a son who became my son, and I actually treat him like my son. I loved him. Still love him. Patrick and I still, Father's Day, he texts me. May the 4th is his birthday. I call him, send him stuff.
That's wonderful.
We're very much involved in one another's life.
Tauruses unite. We love Star Wars.
I know he's going to Full Sail, and I told him, I said, when you graduate, let me know. I'm going to be there. And he lived with my family here, so my daughter is his sister as far as I'm concerned. I was a kid of a step parent. So my father took me on. So that's the only picture I knew in terms of how to be a parent, which is to be all in no matter what,
nice.
regardless of this is my kid, So
yeah.
he's my son. And I literally, he calls me dad, I call him son. And
I'm 100% behind building a family.
Yeah.
Because the family that you're born into sometimes isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for you. So building a family is like top tier.
Yeah.
What I want to do when it comes to family creation.
For sure. And so I remember we would have such arguments and fights, me and this wife at the time. And she loved to argue. So I had to dig deep into some old tools to be able to just fend off. And there were moments and times that we'd have arguments, and I call it her little girl, the little girl inside of her, the one who had one day been hurt, would come out every now and again and be real vulnerable and real wonderful and tell you wonderful things. And then this mean narcissist side of her would wrap up again, and it was terrible. It was her world, and I lived in it. And remember, so this is me still, I went so far the opposite direction.
Yeah.
From that I didn't know who I was. And I'll never forget, we were having an argument or art fight one day, and she was like, you need to do this, you need to man up, you need to blah, 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 all these things. I was so upset because I had been that guy. I had been strong, understanding who I was, and it was, and all this stuff, and I was it was just rough, man.
It sounded like it got you to questioning.
Yeah.
Were you in the right spot?
Right.
Okay.
And so I remember I was real upset, and my best friend had said to me, he goes, hey, when was the last time you talked to God? And I said, and I remember I was real mad. I was like, God doesn't want to talk to me right now, bro. I'm just not feeling it. And he smacked me because he knows how I grew up. And he's like, dude, God's always waiting. He's just waiting. And I was like, he goes, talk to him. So I decided I was going to have a conversation with God. My parents, who I was staying with at the time, because I had chose to leave this situation because I identified it as being a destructive and a very toxic relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
And she even was like, "Why don't you fight with me anymore?" And I said, "I don't want to fight. I
I'm
want to do that.
Tired. I'm tired.
I don't want to do that anymore. I don't care if you're right. I don't care if I'm right anymore. I'm just done." And so I was living with my parents because I had left. I remember I wrote my son a letter saying, no matter what, I need you to know that I love you. I think you're the world. I said, and I will never, ever not be your dad. I said, well, I have not left because of you. Trust me. 100% know that.
Nice.
And he called me, and we even had lunch later on that week, and stayed very much in touch, even regardless. And the little girl inside her let her make sure that was important. She was like, look, you're the only one that's ever shown my son like love, compassion. Like she was able to identify. For the narcissist in her was able to sit here and say, you're showing him things I can't show him. And I was, it was
a blessing
crazy.
all in itself. My goodness.
It is. It really is.
Wow.
And so that's why he's still in my life. But yeah, I went home. If I was going to talk to God after not talking to him for a couple of years, I grabbed a 6-pack of apple cider and I drank 4 in a row. And then I started talking, and it was literally like, so I guess we're supposed to be talking. And I was so mad, and everything from the first marriage to that one and I was so angry and this and that, and like I couldn't write a scene more dramatic because it was raining outside. My parents had gone out of town, so I had the house to myself. Wow. And I'm outside. There's thunder happening. My parents live in a wooded around house, so there's woods everywhere, and I'm sitting there on my knees in the front yard just shouting at the sky. And,
you're right. That's cinematic as hell.
It really was. And I remember it started, the thunder had stopped and it just started raining. But it was like that, like it was almost like Hollywood had turned on the rain. And I'm just sitting there, and it was one of those moments where I feel, and I've never heard God's audible voice. I'm not one of those people, but who says that kind of thing. But I remember feeling I felt in my heart like God was like, are you done? Are you good? Can we now can we start talking? And that began the beginning of my own spiritual kind of healing, which in turn kind of helped. It took all that journey to finally kind of go, yeah. And then I remember I woke up the next morning feeling very refreshed, but very tired. And I went to church that Wednesday, went to church that Sunday, and little by little began to rebuild the pieces. And I committed to myself and my parents, but mostly myself. I had not been alone since I was 16. Mm-hmm. I had been in some version of a relationship. And I realized I needed to be alone.
Well, what good is a narcissist if they don't have people around them?
You got it. You hit it right on the nose.
Yeah.
And I realized I needed to focus on God and work. Work because I had let the drama of the past just bowl me over. And that was part of that, who that weak person was that she called out and whatnot. And I realized I needed to and I finally, years later, began to figure out who I was. And I'll never forget my first time. I got my own apartment. And I went to the supermarket and I bought $300 worth of groceries because I was still buying for everybody, for 3 people. And I remember I went home and I said, I don't want to eat any of this shit. And I drove to my best friend's house, who was 2 miles away, and I pulled up and I said, hey, you got groceries? And he was
Surprise.
Like, and his wife was all excited, like, oh, that's such a great blessing, thank you so much. And he's like, hey, he's like, so they went inside. He goes, what is up? And I said, I need to go back to the store and I need to figure out what I.
There you go.
And so I went to the store. I spent 2 hours in a Publix. And I was like, because I literally was like, do I want, what kind of peanut butter do I want? And I eventually landed on, well, you know what? I do like the honey roasted. I'm going to get the honey roasted because that's what I want.
Finding yourself in a Publix.
Bro.
That's poetic.
I bought 2 bags. I bought 2 bags. That's it. 2 bags. I spent maybe $100 if that. But everything was something I knew I wanted. And that was sort of the beginning for me. It's so funny. That was my first time I started watching YouTube. I started seeing the movie Trivia Schmodown, which was a trivia thing that these guys had put together themselves. And I was like, I like movies. I like this. And the Collider had a movie talk show, and I would watch that. And then I liked John Campea, and I started seeing, I don't know, YouTube. Suddenly I was like, I can do this. And I remember that I watched, they were just going to introduce the newest Doctor, which at the time was Jodie Whittaker.
Okay.
I recorded a little short video on a channel that doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, I was like, yeah, I'm so excited. Oh my God. I watched the thing and recorded the screen while I was watching it, the whole bit. And I was like, hey, it's awesome. I'm so excited. It's the first chick. It's great. It's going to be the best and whatever. I was very excited about it. And I'll never forget, like a month or 2 later, BBC reached out to me and they used a clip of me being excited in their rollout video.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, dude. I was so excited about that. And that was sort of the first foray into me kind of realizing that there was a world I could potentially tap into that could, deep down inside, I think I still seek validation. We all do. But
anybody who sits in front of a camera this long normally does.
But it's so funny because I told my wife and stuff. So I remember I was trying to think who I wanted to be. And because I felt like, Johnny, hey, who's that? Mm-hmm. But also, fast forward to all this, I have a lot of NDAs that I've signed over the years because I was in broadcast and different television things and whatnot.
Sure.
Some that are like about to expire and some that actually have already recently expired.
Will the expired ones become content?
I hope. That'd be cool. I haven't tried it. Cool. I haven't really, but we'll take a look and see because it'd be fun. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to really kind of figure out who I was. And I remember sitting there going, my mother and everybody used to say, you always think you're a know-it-all. But I realized now, and at first I was like, that's just stupid. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. That's dumb. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, but I do like to help other people know stuff.
Yeah.
I do like to help kind of explain things. I'm an explainer. I'm a talker. And what's funny is the internet's one of those rare places where people actually want your opinion. Like that's why they tune in.
Even if they want,
film pundit.
Even if they just want an opinion to rage at, even if it's something that is in their sphere of influence, and they just want to say this guy's an idiot. Like, watch all of his videos in hate form.
No, for real. Well, if you ever see like Nerdrotic, who's currently like the king of hate videos, he hates on everything, but he literally is like, if you liked your video, thank you. If you didn't like it, thank you for watching.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to realize, yeah, there's both kinds. But yeah, and over time, I remember the first time I was on Sidebar that I think I'll never forget. I had a brief relapse of feeling, because I'd never been on this side of a narcissist abusive relationship. I had always been I'd always been the abuser, never the abusee. And now all of a sudden, getting out, I had left or run away or escaped a narcissist relationship, and I didn't know where to turn. I didn't. I went once to see my therapist, and she kind of was like, yeah, no, now she said, you've been a victim of narcissism at this point. And so I went online and I found, at the time I was on Facebook, I've long since left Facebook because I hate that place. But at the time I went there and I found a narcissist survivors page. And it was mostly women, and they were all shocked. And as they would say stuff about they were going through, I would be like, oh my, that's what she used to say to me, blah, 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 blah. And then a couple times they would say stuff and I would be like, I remember when I used to do that. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, I guess I never told you guys. I'm a recovering narcissist. And they were like, are you? And they were like, what do you? And I remember the conversation stopped. And everybody was like, what do you, we need you to explain this. It wasn't confrontational. It was, what do you mean? And I said, well, and I gave rough, small version, Reader's Digest version. It was probably one of the most amazing things because they were so unbelievable about like, one, I can't believe you made it out. That you decided not to be that way anymore. And then the other half of it was, we're happy that you were survived this person because clearly you have a unique viewpoint on that whole situation. But the fact that you decided that you didn't want to be that way. And I had to tell them I couldn't. I've realized when my ex-wife told me about myself, she did more than just tell me about myself. She let me see that I had left wreckage behind, that people were hurt. I had hurt people. I had manipulated you, taking away someone's ability to freely make a choice, even if you think it's a dumb choice, it's still their choice. And that's like the crux of us being people, being able to tell somebody, hey, look, you know what? I don't necessarily agree with your decision, but it's your decision to make. That's huge. And I had taken that away from people. And then just like it had begun to be taken from me. So it was, and it's when, again, that's why I had to tell you the whole story, is because this weird yo-yo. And then finally I started doing videos for my church there. And I had posted a couple on LinkedIn, and then someone had randomly seen one. A friend it's funny, it was like 6 degrees of separation. Someone had reshared it or whatever else, and someone saw it. Next thing I know, I got a direct message from a place up here in Georgia saying, hey, we're looking to hire a video editor. We do faith-based TV, which the truth is it's infomercials. Faith-based TV is infomercials.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
A word network and whatnot.
I've directed and produced a few of them myself. Yeah.
Yeah, but you do it and you dress it up as a show, so you have to actually plan a television show. And that sort of was the beginning of my world getting into broadcast. And eventually I moved up here, and I remember I was working really hard, and it was freeing because nobody knew me. I had no history, and I was able to just be me for the first time. And it's so funny. The first place I stopped when I got here, I found a Publix, and I was like, "Oh my God, you have Publix here too!" Like I walked in and I was emotional. I was like, "I just moved here from Florida, and you understand, this is the only thing that looks familiar. I love this place." And they were like, "Well, welcome to Georgia." It was wonderful. Yeah, so I started doing really good things. And I had this really huge success. I was the first person to help in a meeting. I sold like a $30,000 pilot of someone to come record a talk show pilot in our studio. They'd never rented the studio out for that much before. It was great. Mm-hmm. And I got home and I was like, yeah. Hello? And it was empty. And I was like, so I called up my best friend and I said, hey, you think I'm ready to date? Because I realized that having success by yourself is empty. And he goes, well, if you're really serious, then yeah, probably. If you're asking the question, then you're probably ready to explore that. And I said, all right. So I decided, rather than jumping in like I had before, like I was pushing 32, 30. Oh God, no, I was pushing 35, and I was like, there's no way.
All this before your 40s, by the way.
Yeah.
I want to point that out. There's a lot of people who think that like long-term life changes like that, you wind up like kind of like broken and like trying to crawl out of your things like in your 40s, but life comes at you fast sometimes.
Yeah, dude. And I was exploring lifestyle stuff. I remember saying all the time, my selling point was, I'm living more life than most people ever do. And it's kind of true because things happen so fast. But so because I was different. I was like, you know what? I'm not a go out to the bar dater kind of person. So I went online and I researched what is the best dating site or whatever. And I found, and this is just my own research, this is not me. I'm not selling anything.
Not a sponsor.
I found OkCupid had the best reputation among actual psychologists and people who knew something, specifically because its algorithm is one of the best, and everybody agreed on one thing: before you ever hit see my matches, answer 1,000 questions, because they have questions. So I downloaded the app.
Right.
I downloaded the app, and I was like, okie doke. And I just started answering questions. I'd be sitting on the toilet, answering questions. I'd be waiting on meetings, answering questions. Doctor's office, answering questions. And I got to 1,000, and I went, you know what? Just in case, I answered 300 more. And so I want to be sure, man. I was like, you know what? I don't want to be any doubt. And I remember the very first time I had already put a profile picture, and I put a very modest profile up. I was very honest about what I was looking for in terms of, hey, look, I've been through some stuff. I want somebody I can share a life with, whatever that looks like. And I went to show me my matches, and the first person I went to had no profile picture, and I was like, why did you show up? I guess they'd answered enough questions that the second person was the person who eventually became my wife. And
wow,
I reached out and I was like, hey, just, I literally, my opening line was, so apparently we're 98% compatible according to this thing. And yeah.
My wife she was maybe the 8th person that I talked to on Plenty of Fish, and not like talk to, but actually started a conversation in the chat.
Sure.
And mine was a commentary on her middle name because it is Adele, and I was like, so are you an Adele fan or were your parents Adele fans?
I hate you so. I'm surprised she didn't shut you down.
She was like, this is the most original conversation that has started on this app.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
It turns out there's a bunch of assholes on dating apps. So,
oh my God, that's so funny. Right on.
Yeah. So I didn't really have to guide you really all throughout the steps. You
Sorry.
No, you did a really good job. Like you almost slid like into acceptance too quick without talking about some of the pain and whatnot. I have to say, the relationships that you were in, especially with the 2-year and then the narcissist that wrecked your world for a while. That's a form of bargaining all in itself, because you're like, well, this is the relationship I know I can handle. This is what I can do.
God, I so did too.
Yeah. Which there are two things that came to me while we were talking, and I like to say things like this for the end because it helps to kind of cap off everything. The first thing is that I kind of see you right now as an emotional version of Zoidberg. So I kind of see you as an emotional Zoidberg of a certain way. Like you come into this thing, you talk about the carapace that you had that was narcissism, and then you broke down and you're the jelly version, which everything kind of wiggles and you're just trying to find your place in life.
That's
great. And then you find something that's kind of comfortable and you realize it's not fitting you right. And then eventually, after having one of the most dramatic conversations with God, winds up finding yourself a new Zoidberg body. And it sounds like it's fitting you comfortably. I'm glad to get to know the Johnny that you are right now.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And again, putting it out there like that, the first thing that's normally on your socials is recovering narcissist. It's the same thing. I put the same thing on all my socials, which is just, hello, everybody. Michael LeBlanc here, sitting with you. Welcome to my heart. Your thing, that's nice. Sure. It's saccharine. It's a little sweet, but you're like, nah.
Sure.
This is who I am, and if you want to hear opinions about everything nerd, you're in the right place.
Totally. No, legit.
So, and the second thing that I wanted to dig into is that it's interesting that as a recovering narcissist, your recovery was still very much dependent on the people who are around you, but you started to see them as sources of energy instead of something that you could give your energy to.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
I kind of saw it more like I wasn't leeching. Like I was giving, I could be more communal, less
Sure.
like a vampire. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
don't like make me feel valid instead of
Give me that sweet serotonin.
yeah. Instead, it was
Yeah.
much more like, oh my God, you're so interesting, and you discover so many new. I feel like such a jerk when I say that. People are awesome. Like
Yeah.
like there's stories and depth. Well, because you obviously do this, but like there, you get to realize that people are great. They're messy and they're ridiculous and they're funny and they're deep. And you're like, oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. It's the same reason why I like photography, is because it stops and forces you to take a look at things at either an angle that you've never seen before,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
try to find something and find an angle that nobody else has seen before and kind of lift that up. And in both dealing with people and that, there's a lot of similarities. So sounds like to me that you made it to the acceptance. I mean, you were circling around acceptance anyway, but I feel like you've really got a hold on it. So
Yeah. I feel like for
the future look at for you?
my family, I absolutely have leaned on my faith because that was such a big part of kind of that turning point for me of sort of really reaching a new place. But at the same time, I've really tried to hyper focus on let's communicate, let's talk, let's see what's up. It's good. There are no bad ideas and there are no bad thoughts. When I first my daughter is actually my stepdaughter. She first came to my life. She was 12 and angry because her parents had gotten divorced 2 years prior. I was the new guy and I was whatever. So she came home one day from visiting her dad, and she said, and she was crying, and she was upset, and I was like, "What's going on?" And her dad was having a hard time in the relationship he was in,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, I feel like nobody loves I feel like nobody loves him." I stopped, and God, I was like, "Oh," it hit me so hard, and I said, "Stay right here." And I went upstairs to my wife, and "You're gonna think I'm crazy," and she goes, "What?" I said, "We need to let his name is Torrance. I said we need to let Torrance move in," and she goes, "What?" And I said, we need to let Torrance move in. We have a guest room. He can stay there. We need to let him move in. And she goes, why? I said, because I refuse to have my daughter think that nobody loves her dad. I said, I'm not going to be that person. And I said, and as far as I'm concerned, he's not a threat of any kind. And I just feel like he needs to move in. And so she was like, are you serious right now? I said, yeah. And so we moved him in, and it was about kind of letting them understand people are people and forgiveness is a thing. And we helped him get back on his feet, and eventually he moved out. But at the time, it was very much a lesson in, hey, I remember there were the two of them, and I said, I need you both to understand, you two are always worried about you two. I'm going to be on her team from now on. And so I always made sure that, I wanted to make sure and reinforce. I taught my daughter how bad men can be. And I was like, let me tell you some stuff that these boys might be thinking, and I would really, and I was always very, very much there for her. And even now that it's funny, her biological dad's taken a weird turn and he's sort of disappeared himself and gone into his whole, it's very bad. But I've always made sure she knew that one, she was loved, and two, that we could always talk. And that's what I wanted to really reinforce. That being said, it's about communicating and letting people know that, I'm a very collaborative person. So for me, the future is about kind of making sure that I help my family be healthy moving forward. Healthy in terms of, let's talk things out, whatever. There's not enough talking in the world in terms of, and if you're angry, fine, but don't live there. Don't live there. We got to talk it out.
No.
Whatever it is.
Communicating the anger, as weird as it feels, because we all get told that, keep your loud shit to yourself. If you're going to be loud, do it anonymously on the internet. No, I mean, like, we were there was a whole time, and there still is
That's
going
what X
to
is
be a
for.
time. Yeah, right.
Yeah, totally.
There's going to be a time. There's always going to be a time where being loud is not necessarily the option, but it's going to be an option. And if that's what you got to do, be loud, be real. For Christ's sakes, be real.
Yeah. That's exactly what it boils down to. And I've always told my kid what a narcissist is like. I've explained to her those signs and things to watch out for. And, here's how you know you're being manipulated. So I've kind of taken all the things that I used to do and turned them into life lessons and object lessons of, people do this kind of stuff. They all know. My family knows. None of this is secret. It's just an effort of making sure. I guess for me, the future is helping other people understand, know what that is like, but at the same time.
an Arnold Schwarzenegger type character that has learned all of his stuff in the trenches and is now applying it to save his daughter's life.
There you go.
Commando? Am I getting that right? I think that's Commando.
I think you are. Yes, sir.
I think that's Commando.
Awesome.
That's great. Also, you almost made me tear up a little bit with the story about taking in her dad like that, dude. That's vulnerable and sweet and real and emotionally intelligent. I don't want to just keep pouring accolades on you, but that's
no. It's funny. I'm so happy that I feel uncomfortable with that because I always tell people, look, I do appreciate all that. Thank you, and I accept and receive those
it's hard to accept compliments, dude.
No, well, especially because it's like an alcoholic going by a bar. You know what I mean? And there's times that I will tell my wife, I was like, hey, if it ever seems like I'm getting too big for my britches, you tell me. You know, and it's okay. And
I married a person who does that. She's my biggest critic, and I don't constantly put things out there just to wow her. I constantly put myself out there to see what's gonna stick.
Well, you know how sometimes people who are addicts look at the like coins, the chips, or whatever they have in the different groups. That was one of those moments when I was like, okay, maybe I'm not so bad a person anymore. You know, and I don't mean, and it was like, you know what? Because I meant it. I genuinely was like, I'm doing this for her. I didn't care who saw. I wasn't trying to be like, no, look what we did.
It doesn't sound like it. It sounds from the outside, from the story that you told, sounds entirely selfless, which I'm happy for you and your family, man.
I appreciate that. I always have to. I'm gonna tell myself a little bit in terms of my. It's always there. Way in the back. And by that I mean there are moments that I think about what you just said, and I sit here and I go, you know, maybe I'm still in a tiny way feeding that old, like just little things where I'm like, hey, you know what? Making people feel good does make me look good. It's way in the back. And I tell my wife that I always have to check myself with her. I'm like, you think I'm, and she's like, no, you're fine. I was like, all right. But but it's because you're never, I feel like you never are sure. And that's part of being on guard. Making sure that I understand if I'm bullshitting or not.
Well, and that's why it's huge to be with somebody who can see you from the outside and not be afraid to tell you what they're seeing. So I'm glad that you have that.
Appreciate you, brother.
Not a problem. Well,
this has been awesome. Thank you so much for this.
Not a problem.
I need you to know this is probably the only living record of all of those events.
Well,
so I'm going to save this show. You have no idea. I'm going to save this so much, like legit.
I saw you touch some potentially raw things that you haven't touched in a while, and that's why I'm excited about this particular season, because I want to focus on the story and not a gimmick, because the story itself is possibly the best, I think, gimmick that I could get out of this, because it's real for them. The last guy that I had, I mean, he's still shook up. He's not in his acceptance phase yet. So the fact that he wanted to talk, I normally don't talk to people who haven't been in their loss cycle for less than a year. Okay. Loss can last longer than that, but he wasn't even in an acceptance yet. But he felt lighter, he said afterwards. So
you could very well have been like that stepping stone of
that
process.
Right. I mean,
cool. That's cool.
If I'm kind of been calling myself here recently kind of a grief eater.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because it's there are people out there who like they've called them sin eaters or whatever, people who take in the information. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know why, it just feels right. So thank you so much for being on the show and doing this.
And it's funny because that makes a lot of sense as a Buddhist. Not that I know everything about Buddhists, but I mean, like that whole idea of letting things go, but at the same time, kind of like taking everything in as it is. You know what I mean? Whatever that is, and that's awesome. I'm really, I'm excited for you and the journey you're on with this. This is cool. This is great. I will definitely. I did only check out the last one, and kind of perfunctorily scan some others, but I think I will keep up for sure, because I enjoyed this a lot, and I would love to see kind of where you keep going with this. Well, so please keep doing it, brother. Keep doing it.
Thank you. I'll tell you this: if you know anybody who is having a hard time with anything that they've lost, or a rough time in their life that they want to, because again, I'm a firm believer that any rough times in your life brings about these, changes, no matter how minute or how quick they happen. So send them my way. But Johnny, where can they find you?
I'm on all the socials as @arealknowitall because most every platform has Mr. Know-It-All in some form taken by someone who does
If they do, it was hard to find.
I stayed away from film for a while because I was kind of feeling a little burned after the pandemic. But I've started, and I have a handle on the X. It's J Johnson Films, and I'm going to try to start doing some AI stuff with ideas of my own, like take my ideas.
Brave of you to keep like sailing your boat in X when everybody else is just seeing it as like a shitstorm.
I'm also on the others too. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on all of them.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's such
I found my peace with that, of just being a place that just puts my unfiltered opinions and just like shit posting there. Everything else has been like, just putting out my videos or whatever. Blue Sky's like only specifically food for me.
That's
only,
awesome.
only food related posts. Only food related posts.
No, totally.
But
that's
a
awesome.
real know-it-all, all one word. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep.
Anywhere that you want to learn about everything that this guy knows.
Doing it, man.
And I guess we'll go ahead and call it there. As always, I'm Michael LeBlanc. This has been Johnny Johnson. And if you miss next month's episode still, it's your loss. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.